I'm a big fan of John Mark Reynolds. He follows me everywhere I go. He became provost at Houston Baptist after I did, and we have spent the most time ever just in the last 24 hours. We spent a lot of time reading each other's writings and talking with one another through emails or social media and through our common friends, but he represents a person who is an Acton person in the sense that the fundamental ideas that are born first in the mind of God and are shared with us that touch every aspect of our lives is what motivates him. And what motivates him is not pure economics. We do a lot of that here. It's important to us. But we don't want to lose sight that there is more to being an individual created in the image of God, living the life we're supposed to. There's more to that than economics. There is what is true and what is good and what is beautiful, which is throughout the scriptures and is throughout the writings of all the great philosophers. There are some horrible philosophers who don't focus on that, but a lot of the great philosophers get that. And so his background in philosophy and Christian higher ed and Christian secondary ed and now elementary ed as well bears that out. John Mark Reynolds, your program has his biography. I will not go through that. You can see the things that he's done in Christian higher education. And the thing that he's doing now at St. Constantine School, and I hope he'll take a few moments to talk about it, maybe during the questions and answers you can talk about it, is nothing less, after Betsy DeVos, than the solution to our higher education problems, because it puts every bit of the emphasis on who the human person really is, instead of what governments and bureaucracies and unions and all the people that are just really tangential to what's happening in education. It puts the emphasis on the right place. And it does that because it knows the pursuit of what is true and good and beautiful is the only way to educate anybody. So it's a treat to have him here to talk about these issues, and I look forward to the questions and answers as well. Please welcome my friend, Dr. John Mark Reynolds.
That was generous. I'm always lucky to follow Paul Bonicelli, especially after an introduction like that, because he's always done such a great job that I only have to rinse and repeat. So that's always a good thing. And if I can do as good a job as the introduction claims I can, we'll all be better off. Here's an idea. I know it's not terribly exciting to think that you get to, for a half an hour and then some question and answer time, hear from a philosopher. Philosophers are perhaps not the people on the planet with the reputation of being the most practical people that ever lived, nor the most interesting to listen to. We're sometimes called the MIGO profession. My eyes glaze over. Whenever I tell anybody I'm a philosopher, they said, "Oh, I took intro to philosophy class. My teacher was insane." Yes, yes. Or they say something like, "Do you know of the Swami, blah, blah, blah? My dissertation was on Plato. I don't know about their particular guru." And so they assume I'm a fraud. And so those are the two ways it goes. The nice thing about philosophy is, however, we don't have to worry about money. The only difference between a philosopher and a pizza is that a pizza can feed a family of 4, and we cannot. So relax. I'm not going to give you financial advice, except to not become philosophers. But I am going to suggest several things. And I actually think I'm going to get to a heart of a problem for those of us who believe in liberty. And it's a problem that, as far as I know, almost no one talks about, especially in the business realm. I don't need to tell you that if you have to pay people to do their job, you'll get less out of them than if they love their job. People will do for love sometimes even bad things, things that go against their own interests. They will do for love what they would never do for money, or at least what your business or a corporation or a government can't afford to give them. Here's a thesis: a culture collapses not when it becomes poor, Very often, think of Russia in 1917. It's the middle class, the aspiring middle class, the people that are in a kind of silver age that cause a revolution. I think revolutions come when people cease to love the social order that they are supposed to sustain. And a social order can continue for some time because it hands out treats. We all know that whoever is elected president, there is a sort of bureaucratic vermin who will stay in office forever, attempt to stay in office forever, because what they care about is the system and perpetuating the system and getting paid, advancing towards retirement. In fact, I would argue that in the St. Constantine project, a project to rethink higher education, and by way of rethinking higher education, rethink K through 12 education. Part of our problem is that so often we deal with people who work for money. Now, I'm a free market guy. Let me hasten to say I work for money. I have to support my two parents and my family. I have 4 kids that I keep waiting to leave so that I can have the pleasure of an empty nest. So I have to make money, but I'll work harder for love than I will purely for money. My second thesis is this: people are stirred to love something by beauty. Now, if you want a scholarly sounding citation, I'll just tell you Plato said that in his Symposium. But let's just be practical. I met Hope at a dinner where we made the mistake. Hope is my wife. She's also a virtue. So every time I talk about Hope, it sounds like I'm saying something genuinely profound. Hope I have with me always. I just mean my wife is here all the time. Oh, that's deep. Deep, deep. You should write it down. It's in the Bible and stuff. When I saw her across the room, if you had made me do what I did next, which is stay up all night working on a strategy to get a date by the end of Christmas. I showed up early the next morning with a dozen red roses and a book of a former mentor of mine, A Severe Mercy. It had to be timed perfectly. And I suffered for the entire week, for which I did not even receive a kiss. But she married me, gentle readers. And so it was worth it. A man will do for love what you couldn't pay him to do. I imagine the amount of band concerts I've been to. My wife is a classically trained trumpet player. I have never voluntarily gone to a band concert in my life. But I have, for love of Hope, gone to hundreds of band concerts. You couldn't have paid me to go. Well, okay, you could have. If somebody's wealthy enough to try, please make me an offer. But you would have had to pay me a good bit. But to see the look in her eyes, that was enough. So I hope I don't have to spend a lot of time proving to you that love will get people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do. And that our society is now attempting to pay people to do things they used to do for love. I don't know about where you vote, but where I vote, the World War II generation is still minding the polls. I felt like minding the people minding the polls in the last election. Went in with my son and we needed an absentee ballot, and he had to call in for the person because cell phones turned out to be a technology just a couple of steps beyond the technological level of our poll watcher. But do you know what? I know that at my polling place in Sugar Land, there's no voting corruption because you couldn't bribe those greatest generation women because they're not there for money or the free coffee, which was horrible. They're there for the love of country. And when that generation passes away, here's my fear, even in Texas, we're going to end up paying poll watchers. Good luck with that. Because if you're doing the job for money, somebody with more money might be able to challenge you. Let's put it this way. When you send your kids to school, whether it's to college or to kindergarten, and we do both at the St. Constantine School, I'll teach Plato in the morning to kindergarten students and get hit in the head with a soccer ball by college students. You'd think it would be reversed, but what can I tell you? You haven't met 18-year-olds lately if you don't think it's reversed. It's this. You don't want the teacher of your child to be fundamentally motivated by a paycheck. And there is job after job after job after job that will work in a free society because it's done for free, because beauty. I saw those 4 babies born, and one that was born into paradise, a 5th. And there is nothing I would not do within the realm of morality, and maybe a little beyond, for my children. And here is the key cultural problem. If you will agree with me that beauty stimulates love, we have a problem in that starting somewhere in the 1950s, people in the United States began to be educated in government schools to believe that beauty was subjective. That beauty was, if I go to a church, the most fundamentalist church possible, and I say, beauty is, the main response I will get is, in the eye of the beholder. Now, I don't know who told you that, but I was told that by a giant woman in 5th grade. She looked giant to me at the time, wearing a polyester zebra pantsuit. It's the kind of government employee you always fear. It was like a moment from Orwell, only in upstate New York. And she handed out what was called the fact opinion worksheet. And the job of the fact opinion worksheet, it was the best day of English ever, because if you got anything wrong on the fact opinion worksheet, you shouldn't have been in 5th grade, was to identify facts versus opinion. So the Empire State Building is XYZ feet tall. Fact. Could be wrong, whatever that number is, but it's a fact. A rose is beautiful. What was the correct answer? Opinion. Well, the correct answer, of course, from a Judeo-Christian point of view, in my considered opinion, is fact. But I knew better than to put that, even in 5th grade. And so this zebra pantsuited woman who thought polyester was a good fashion idea determined my idea of what beauty is for a large part of my life. I believe that the beginning of cultural decay provably comes when a culture decides that objective reality is a matter of subjectivity, my opinion, what I feel is true, and subjectivity becomes a matter of fact from which you cannot deviate without being called a heretic. Now, if you haven't immediately applied this to what's called sexual politics, you've missed my point. But forget that for a minute, because it's not the root cause of the problem, it's only a symptom. Again, when I go to a school, whether it's a university, a very liberal one like Reed College, or I go to a Christian school like First Baptist in Houston, and I say, beauty is objective. If you do not think my wife is beautiful, you're wrong. If you don't think Bach is beautiful, you've made a mistake. Not the same sort of mistake as 2 + 2 = 4, but you've still made a mistake. You can learn to love something, see its beauty, if you know the beauty is there. But notice that if I say something like this, whether it's at Reed College, where just my being a Christian was introducing a foreign and argumentative element into the campus when I spoke there on beauty. Or First Baptist. In fact, at one Christian school, all I had to say was, some music is ugly and needs to be ugly because it's expressing ugly ideas. Art doesn't all have to be beautiful. If you make beautiful concentration camp art, something's gone wrong with you. That's not the appropriate reaction. But when I say beauty is objective, I actually had one high school of Christian young adults began to audibly groan and boo before I said anything else. Now we know why. We believe, as lovers of liberty, that if I leave questions of beauty to my taste, that will be liberating, that I will be set free, and that really what Reynolds wants to do is come to our school or come to Acton and tell me what I should like and what I should be doing. Now, let me tell you, my family is 400 years in Virginia, West Virginia. The only opera we ever went to had Grand Old in front of it, and we couldn't afford to go, so we listened on the radio. But there's a difference between liking something, the beauty of, for example, bluegrass as a preference, to doing what I did Tuesday night, which is see the final part of Wagner's Ring cycle. It was hard work for me. 5 hours of Germans. Ask Poland. Man, it's just tedious. A lot of German goes a long way. I mean, but what did I know? I knew the problem was not the beauty of the music. The music was beautiful, and I could learn to like it if I wanted. And that there was something there that I could learn. That what was tedious to me was my problem, not the problem of the music. And so I mastered my ignorance and found joy. I found beauty that was there, that wasn't my natural taste. Beauty produced love, and love gave me a desire to endure. You couldn't have paid me to go to the concert. In fact, I paid. But I did it to see beauty, which produced love, which ends in joy. Now, let me be very practical. My grandfather never got to go to school past the 8th grade. Like every Reynolds from Jamestown forward, he had gone to the most school. Yet he was a wise man who read the King James Bible and 2 newspapers, the Democratic and the Republican newspaper in Charleston, West Virginia, every day, had a dictionary next to his comfortable chair where he'd look up words he didn't know. Let me remind you of something. When a Bible translator tells you that they have to translate the Bible again to appeal to the youth, they have a problem. My 8th grade graduate grandfather no more related to King James English than today's freshman in college. It no more related to the world he grew up in and lived in than today's sophomore in college. But my grandfather knew that the King James Bible was one of the foundation pieces of creating the modern English language, and that struggling through it and learning to understand it was good for him, not just spiritually, but in terms of the education he coveted but never gained. As a result, to the day he died, his diction began to sound Shakespearean because he was learning for love of God's word and the English language. What you could not have forced him to do, no matter how many prizes you offered him. But more importantly, my handsome, capable, I don't know what happened in the genetic pass down, don't blame my mother for me. My handsome, capable grandfather had worked in chemical plants. And eventually, this caused a neurological disorder that would kill him. And by the time he died, though he was sharp mentally, he couldn't care for himself. And so my grandmother did. And I remember sitting at the funeral behind my grandmother, bent over, strong West Virginia woman, so not crying, just sad. And somebody came up to her and they said something, because people always have to say something at funerals. And they said, "Well, Sybil, we're sorry he's gone, but it's just as good, because caring for him had to have been so hard on you." And her back straightened, and her brown eyes clarified like lasers. I was leaning forward, I could see this. And this plain West Virginia woman said, "I would do all of it again for 20 more years for 10 minutes with him." You cannot pay a person to clean up after a man the way my grandmother cleaned up after my grandfather. But she'll do it for free, in freedom, without government support or aid, for the beauty she saw in that old man. Not beauty that was subjective and merely a matter of the heart, but beauty that was real and objective and true. And she had, over the course of her Christian life, because she was not taught that beauty was subjective, submitted her notions of what was beautiful and good and true to her own Christian faith. And so as her husband aged, she came to see the more subtle beauty that exists in an older man, and did not love him less. She loved him more. When I was a little boy, my favorite food was Captain Crunch Peanut Butter Crunch. Only got it at Christmas because it was rich kid food. And I still occasionally at Christmas eat it. But if you get to 53 and your favorite food is still Captain Crunch Peanut Butter Crunch, there is no glory in living. People keep sending me emails, now fortunately off to the spam filter, that say, "Barely legal." Doesn't anyone grow up anymore? Doesn't anyone grow up to say, "Boy, that person would have been attractive to me when I was 20, but for Pete's sake, boring, because I'm married to 53. And I know hope is beautiful. And so just as it's harder to love a complex thing, so for her, I'm sure, seeing me as beautiful and created in the image of God, yes, physically, is harder than at 22 when we met. But it is necessary. It's growing up. When we believe in objectivity, we are free from the beholders. We said to ourselves, if we place beauty in the eye of the beholder, then we are the beholder, and we will be free to choose our music, to choose our art, to choose what will be beautiful for us. But what we did do is turn over power to the subjective brokers who sat in studios and in fashion shops and often hated the women they were dressing. if subjectivity is the only reality when it comes to beauty, and a girl goes to school and everyone says, "You're fat and unattractive," and she picks up magazine after magazine, and there's not one woman of color in it, not one woman with her body shape, not one woman her mother's age, then beauty being in the eye of the beholder is not liberating, it is the ultimate tyranny. Because the only reality is what those guys in high school say in judgment about you. And the fact that your dad and mom think you're pretty is nothing. Because the reality becomes ultimately what a few people tell us. And then ultimately, in every case, the state will seize control of the arts and begin to tell us what is beautiful, and the beholders in the state will take away all power from us because we do more motivated by love and beauty in any given day than anything else. How do I look? How do I feel? How does she look? How does she feel? Is this room comfortable? Is this room not comfortable? There's a reason they made this room look like this. It's a more effective place to study than if they hadn't covered the walls in beautiful books and they hadn't taken the time to decorate it and make it lovely. If you don't believe me, think of state schools. State schools are designed for utility, where a student is surrounded by no beauty whatsoever. Christians built the campuses of Oxford and Cambridge, where if the last Christian were to die tomorrow, the buildings and the stained glass, and yes, even Evensong, are so beautiful that the gospel will be preached there for 1,000 more years. Because even Richard Dawkins isn't a big enough barbarian to destroy the beauty of the dreaming spires of Oxford. If you don't believe that surrounding people with beauty matters, imagine a parent who was a good parent and loved their kid and intentionally surrounded them only with practical things, only with utility, concrete and plastic. And they hugged them and they loved them, but they never let them listen to beautiful music. And then imagine a second child who was equally loved, but surrounded by what classical Christian culture would call beauty and recognized as beauty. Does anyone want to be the first child? Would anyone do that experiment on their own beloved child? And yet, I want to point out something. If I go to a secular school and say abortion is wrong, which it is, someone, maybe most someone's, will get mad because I've taken what they believe is subjective and made it objective. And the loss is liberty. If I go to some postmodern programs, particularly in English departments, and I say that truth exists apart from human thought, or that truth is knowable, someone will get angry with me because I've taken what they believe to be subjective and tried to make it objective. And the loss in those departments is always liberty, even liberty of expression, because their subjectivity becomes the new dogma. But I say this to you, at all of those schools, and now including most Christian colleges, if I stand up and say that music is ugly, that art is bad, everyone, my age, older, younger, will be offended. Because great evangelical churches will not hire subjective engineers. But Pastor Bob may know nothing about art, but he knows what he likes, and so will build a church that is a blasphemy against the objective beauty of God. In other words, we take what is fundamentally objective, the fact that the cosmos is beauty without end. I took my oldest son on a plane trip. We went above the clouds where no human could have evolved the ability to see beauty. And he said, "Wow, Dad, Cloudland is beautiful." And though it's weird, we plunge to the depths of the ocean. And what do we say? Well, that's beautiful. And we can take a telescope and look to the farthest reaches of the cosmos and the structure of the smallest things that we can find to the largest macro structure. And we say that is beautiful because beauty does not exist in us. It exists in the thing itself. Very quickly, and then I'm done. There are many reasons to think that beauty is objective, but one of them is simply that. When I say to Hope, "Darling, you look beautiful." She wore a white pantsuit to work the other day with a blue silk blouse. And you finally understood what Hillary Clinton had been trying to do all that time. It's just started waving at me like this. That was a little frightening. And I said, "Darling, you look beautiful." Here's what I didn't think. I'm having beautiful thoughts. Where did I think the beauty was? In her. Now, that doesn't prove with Cartesian certainty that beauty exists, but it sure strongly suggests it. Try to go around for a whole day just saying instead, "That's good, true, and beautiful," saying, "I'm having good, true, and beautiful thoughts." Hi, honey, you are stimulating in me beauty feelings. Makes a worse date than "you look great." Secondly, of course, there's the common judgment of humankind about things like roses. I once had the privilege of cleaning out a house that had been owned by people who didn't believe in beauty, and they decided to live, that was next to Disneyland, but they lived with Mickey's larger relatives, rats. It turns out as you kill rats, they are carnivorous creatures, and when poisoned, as I pulled down the roof, 2 dead rats in a trap began to spiral towards my head. And I leapt back, and I did not think, "I am having gross feelings." I said, "Gross." And they landed, and I discovered that because it was Southern California and it had been hot, the Lord of the Flies had come and produced friends. They were fruitful and multiplying inside the rats. And I looked at the rats and said, "Gross." And some of you are thinking right now, we just ate. Why did Botticelli bring this evil philosopher telling his evil, ugly story to us? Because you don't think the problem is you, it's the story. And if you date a man who brings you roses, he might be okay. But if he brings you 2 dead rats in a trap with maggots, run away. And I don't have to tell you that, because it's the common judgment of humankind that roses are beautiful, even in cultures that haven't seen roses until we bring them. Finally, I was a little kid. A show came out called Sesame Street. Yes, it's a government show, therefore intent on teaching me that beauty is subjective. But they undermined everything by accident by having a clever little song called "One of These Things Is Not Like the Other." And if I had an image, which I don't, of 2 dead rats in a trap with maggots, I promise. I promise. And when you saw it, you wouldn't blame yourself, you'd blame me for showing you the ugly image, right? And I had a picture of roses and a picture of Michelangelo's David, my favorite piece of human-made art. Every time I'd see it in Florence, I would just be staggered by its beauty. And I put those images up with the smallest child or with us. And I said, "One of these things is not like the other." I've never had anybody not get it. The natural beauty of the roses, colorful, very different than the human-made beauty of the David. Very white and gray and shadows. But everyone recognizes that there's something that we're going to call beauty that those things have in common. Now, none of these arguments, taken as they are conclusive. But particularly for a religious person, let me remind you of something. God says of paradise when we get there, the city of God, that it will be beautiful. Hell is the place for people that want to do interior decorating when they get to heaven. Hell is the place for people that go to cathedrals that generations of enormously poor people built for the love of God and beauty and install shag carpeting. If we believe beauty is objective, it is singularly liberating. Because suddenly, the things that matter most are free. And each individual can be seen as beautiful, objectively beautiful, in their own way, shape, and form. We can begin to appreciate God's handiwork, none of which costs money, all of which leads to love as we see things correctly. And love motivates us to do great things and fills us with joy. A joy that the state cannot give and the state cannot take away. Because free men and women making love have a fecundity that produces the next generation. Nobody has to tell them. And if marriage was banned tomorrow, nobody would have to tell me to vow to hope till death do us part. I do it freely. And then my duty carries me forward. There's a story told about a boy who wouldn't grow up, Peter Pan. And he played all the time in this place called Neverland with pirates and red Indians. But there was no meaning or purpose to anything he did. And so he did not turn to the state because the state cannot provide meaning and purpose. He turned to the one element that can always provide meaning and purpose to any story that created the fairy tale. He turned to a mother. And he went to London and found a girl, Wendy, and he took her to Neverland. But she, in a sense, destroyed Neverland because she began to do what Christians and free men and women always do. She began stories with once upon a time. And as C.S. Lewis has said, if we think that the castles and the dukes and the stepmothers are fantasy, they weren't to the people who originally told the stories. Once upon a time, and then in Christian nerve, after suffering, every fairy tale entails suffering on the part of the hero or heroine. Has the nerve to end how? How do they all end? Happily ever after. Never because they got a grant from an agency. And so Cinderella was helped by the social worker and went to Berkeley and became Antifa and miserable. The end. It just doesn't work. So Wendy went, she destroyed Neverland, and soon all the lost boys wanted to go where? Home. The place love creates that the state can never create. The home, the church, the social order. And so Wendy left, and Peter wouldn't come along. And every year we're told he would visit her to come back and do spring cleaning. But like all men who are not civilized, who believe in subjective beauty, he began to forget. Until one year he returned and shook the girl in the bed. And Wendy turned from the fire to look at her daughter Jane and said, "No, Peter, no." And he looked up and said, "Wendy, darling, you've grown old." Yes, lines around her eyes. Gray at the temple. No longer beautiful like a girl. And Wendy said the simplest thing. No, Peter, I've become a mother. But a culture of subjectivity views stretch marks as not the silvery sheen of fecundity, but scars to be removed. And it views age as something to be warehoused and not loved. Culture will only die when people have to be paid to do what love did voluntarily. Thank you, and God bless you. Good time for questions?
Thank you very much, John Mark. One of my colleagues will take, Patrick, can you help me? We'll have 2 mics, and we've got about 15 minutes, so I'll cover this side of the room, and then Patrick will cover that. So if you have a question, just raise your hand.
Objective beauty, what is your definition? What is the definition of beauty?
That's a first question I always get asked, and I'm not going, I'm actually, yeah, I'm not going to tell you. And the reason I'm not going to tell you is I think we're always tempted to do something like this. I'm an analytically trained philosopher. I love definitions, and I've written about it. You could go look, and I could give you a definition. But I want you to notice something. We don't have to define a thing to know what it is. Definitions serve a usefulness as we get down to fine detail. But if I tell a kid, go get me a Diet Coke, they can go get it without being able to define it. So as adults, let's start just with this. We roughly know what beauty is until we're educated out of it. It's that. Like we point towards it, and that it's hard to define anything, especially something complex like beauty, is not surprising because it's a big idea. It's like defining God, right? Or defining a chair. Is that a chair? I promise you, as a Socratically based educator, if I ask you to define chair, I could quickly show that you're confused. I promise. I've done it for years. Now, I'm going to tell you this. Beauty is something like incarnate mathematical regularity. It's incarnate math. So that definition by itself isn't very beautiful, but what can I tell you? Math is real, and you should take it seriously. Put it this way, I once handed in a logic proof that I solved correctly, but I didn't get full credit because the teacher rightly said in graduate school, you used 115 lines to do what could have been done in 20. No full credit. I didn't make any mistakes. It was inelegant. I had incarnated a kludgy hack. I could have worked for Microsoft and not for Apple.
Right over here.
Sorry, they pay me to say that. No, they don't.
Hi there. Thanks for your talk. Yeah, we definitely live in an ugly world and we need more beauty.
No, we live in a beautiful world that we make ugly, and you have to spend a lot of money to do it. My grandfather, who is poor and uneducated, built a beautiful church out of West Virginia hardwood using hand tools. So beautiful they would stop and take pictures of it, people from the city. Then they got some money, the next generation, and covered up the beautiful hardwood floors with polyester royal blue carpet and took out the Depression-era glass and put in cheap painted glass and took out the beautiful 1920s light fixtures and hung fluorescent light tubes from the ceiling and were proud of themselves because they had spent a lot of money. It takes humans, and particularly the state, to create ugliness. Go look at Tsarist Russian buildings and then go look at Soviet-era buildings. I'm sorry, you got me on a rant.
Yeah, so this might be, yeah, it's kind of a comment. It's mostly a comment followed by a bit of a question. And I just kind of fundamentally think like you got the wrong dichotomy between whether or not beauty is objective or subjective, because truth is both objective and subjective. It's objective insofar as the object is like being, but it's subjective insofar as the subject is the knower. And you can't have truth as a full package without both the subject and the object.
Sure.
I mean, I think the real issue here, I know that objectivity and subjectivity is just like common parlance, and maybe that's why we're using it, but I find that more the issue is whether or not beauty is communicable. Whether or not the subjectivity of look at the stretch marks and see them as beautiful, look at the house and don't want to, you know, recavate it. You know, like, we need to find ways to pass on not necessarily the object, because that's always there, but the correct subjectivity to perceive it. Because there is a right way to look at this.
I think the dichotomy actually works pretty well, and it works well for this reason. What I just said, if you get down to it, is you're entitled to your opinion and your taste, but your taste can be uneducated and bad. Now, I shouldn't run around making you have my opinion and taste. I think that's the mistake Christian school students thought, that I was somehow going to grab their iPhones and rend their music off their phone. But as a small government guy, that's not what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is try to elevate their taste, not to take away anything, but to add to. I don't like bluegrass less because I'm learning to like Wagner more. Does that make sense?
So pedagogically, how do you engender that?
I will tell you why. The greatest symptom that I didn't have time to talk about of the subjectivity of beauty, in my opinion, and what destroys a culture is boredom. And if I go to a secular school or a Christian school and I say, how many of you want to be good? I get almost no takers. But if I say, how many of you never want to be bored again? Everybody's in. I have yet to meet a single person who is an advocate for boredom. There are people who like evil, kind of cool, right? Darth Vader is much cooler looking than many of the characters in Star Wars. But boredom doesn't have a big constituency. Come on our cruise, it's boring. Yes, the Acton Institute lunches, they're dull. It's hard to sell things that way. And so I think boredom is produced when our own opinions swallow us up. So by learning to love objectively, when music appreciation was taught in every school in the United States, and it wasn't what the kids already liked, because we didn't have to be taught what we already liked, but we were taught what we should like. Then we created people with more likes, not less. If you can't enjoy listening to something beautiful in folk like Simon and Garfunkel or Bridge Over Troubled Water, there's something wrong with you. But it's simple. And there are more complex pleasures. You know, you should graduate. College students will buy Jaeger and drink it. Don't be doing that in your 50s. Get a better palate, and we can educate our palates. And how do you convince people to do that? By telling them truthfully, they'll never be bored again. I haven't been bored in decades. I've been evil, but I haven't been bored in decades. Ask my confessor. One more at least.
Other questions? Patrick.
Yes, you mentioned the St. Constantine Project on education.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Why, thank you. I'll give you your $20 later. It took a long time to set that up. Imagine this. At the end of the Second World War, no Reynolds had gone past the 8th grade in the history of the Reynolds family, and we came in the 1620s. The Pilgrims are interlopers. We are still resenting that they came and ruined our continent. But we never had to, we have the same jobs, I went to say, other than John Mark. All the Reynoldses of my generation have the same jobs that Reynoldses always had. We just now have college degrees. In many ways, education as we know it started in 1945 when the government in its infinite wisdom decided that GIs coming home, many of whom had never had jobs, were going to be demobilized and having to compete with young adults, and they'd know how to shoot. So going back to massive unemployment with people who had just gotten done storming Okinawa seemed like a bad plan. It would be nice to the GIs. In many ways, my dad, who was a kid, went to high school and then college and then graduate school to do the same job my great-grandfather did with an 8th grade education, the same job, because the government told him to. Did he benefit from it? Some. Was it worth what got spent on it? Maybe. But at that time, it was possible for my grandfather, with his 8th grade education and his Union Carbide DuPont job, back and forth, to sell his car and his refrigerator and get my dad through a state university, paying all the tuition. It will not shock anyone in here that when my godfather, Philip Johnson, UC Berkeley Law School, first went to Berkeley after clerking for Earl Warren as a law professor, I think they had 1 dean and a couple of admins. By the time government money got done, I asked him last time I talked to him, it was last Thursday, how many deans they had. He couldn't count them anymore. He's retired, and admins are everywhere. Admins have admins. And Berkeley is no better as a law school, arguably worse in terms of reputation. What if we went back to 1945, utilizing the technology that we have now and the fact that schools kept pumping out PhDs as if it's still the 60s and 70s when we had to hire a lot of people, and we conglomerated kindergarten through undergraduate college, and we eliminated all administrators. Everyone teaches. That's the St. Constantine strategy. As a result, a fully regionally accredited undergraduate degree can be procured by you for $12,000 a year. No debt, no government aid, and we'll put you in work study with a K through 12, so you probably pay nothing. Can it be done? We're doing it. And we're doing it with kids in Houston who can't afford to bring lunch to school, but who, if they stick it out, will graduate from high school with an associate's degree and a generic baccalaureate degree in liberal arts, and be able to go to grad school, which is anyway the new college, with no debt. Free men, free markets. And my teachers make more than they would make at the local private colleges and universities because we have no departments full of administrators making giant salaries. And if you want to watch football, we tell our students to take the money that we save them and buy season tickets for the Texans and a home in Houston to watch other teams. Because you could do it. Introduce me to her. I'd love to talk to her. Can be done. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Betsy DeVos.
What's the website if they want to learn?
For the college, it's the college at stconstantine.org. It's stconstantine.org. But just type in St. Constantine, John Mark Reynolds, and you'll get the school. The K through 12 school is Saint spelled out Constantine.org. The college has its own site.
Yeah.
But imagine this. College student comes in, sits in a small tutorial with a full PhD. Bob Stacy, our former colleague, Ivy League diploma. Then they leave and go work in a garden growing, of all things, kale. Grows well in Houston, what can I tell you?
Other questions? We have time for one more if you're interested. Yes.
Oh, and you're objectively beautiful, right? Yeah.
To be objective today, the real need in the world is for tradesmen.
Yes, that's correct.
So are you doing anything in that regard?
Yes, notice in a lot of jobs, a baccalaureate degree is just a union card in any case. Yes, we will be working, it's our first year of operation, with trades to put students in. But notice if we can, not either or, graduate you with a debt-free Oxford-style PEP, politics, economics, philosophy, liberal arts degree, and you have no debt, and you look around, one thing we will say to you is, go become a plumber. Many of my best honors college former students who are doing best in life took their really good classical education and became plumbers and electricians and designers of homes, or served in the military, or did other what we might call hands jobs. And so a refusal to denigrate those jobs just because I'm leading a great books discussion on Plato is a big part of what we're doing. See, what's the problem? If we separate the academy from mothers and dads, and we treat students as if they're priests in training, dorms, cutting them out from the life of the regular city, people will begin to think that those of us who work mostly with our minds are superior to those who do not, because you tend to want to be like your mentor, which is why K through college, all of our students garden. All of our students get dirty in mud. In Houston, humidity, you walk outside and you sweat. And this is important because we're physical beings. We don't need necessarily more lawyers. But if you're in my area, one honest car repairman, I think I would die for that person. I would look at them, have love. Love would lead me to throw money at them, and then I would be full of joy.
John Mark, thank you so much.